What's going on, folks? It's your main man, Rick the Dawn. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Before I get started, I have to say thank you so much to the people who are continually supporting my channel, supporting my videos. It shows me you appreciate the work I put in. I really want to say thank you for that. And also I want to invite you to three of my websites, reallyhood.com to check out some music, vidmondo.com if you are a content creator and you would like to upload content without all the restrictions that YouTube typically provides. And also my new website, wordy.com. Wordy.com is officially open and open today. It is officially done. Please go over and check it out, create an account, and join the family. Now let's jump into BB Talk. This episode starts off with Daniel revealing that he understands and knows that there is a underlying alliance, and it appears that he's on to at least 6 of the 7 leftovers members. The only player that he doesn't quite have a read on is Kyle. So shout out to Kyle. I didn't think that Kyle would be the most discreet amongst the bunch, but I think his romance with Alyssa is throwing off those individuals that are in opposition of the leftovers. But yeah, Daniel points out that he's seen 7, or I should say most of the leftovers alliance in the HOH room at the same time. If you watch my previous recap, then you know exactly what I'm talking about here. I've already pointed out how I thought that the leftovers alliance being too clustered was a terrible, terrible idea. I think what the last episode you saw, if not 6 members, at least 5, all in the HOH room all together, and there were no external cast members in the room with them. So it was almost like a open giveaway, as if they want to be discovered. And I would argue that maybe Kyle and maybe Monty are the only players within the leftovers alliance that are trying to keep things covert. Now it's funny because Monty is a player who I've really criticized quite a bit on this channel, but he's done some really redeeming things in this episode. Number one, he tried to keep Nicole safe, and I think he makes that known throughout the episode, saying, "Hey, I wanted Nicole to stay here," and it's actually Daniel's insistence on Nicole going on the block which is what caused her exile. Um, Now, I want to also point out, I saw in this episode that Taylor cried a lot. And surprisingly, and it really hit me later, that this is probably what helps the leftovers stay under the radar, because Taylor is so upset and angry at the nomination. And you really can't fake tears. I mean, when you see people cry, you usually don't think, the first thought is never really they're faking. Unless you got like a little sister or something out there, then you probably might think that. But overall, when you're talking about adults and it's not on a movie scene or anything like that, when somebody cries, you usually take it as genuine. So I think that Taylor being so upset about being on the block helped keep this whole idea discreet. And I didn't realize that until I watched the last episode, the one that just went off. And I'm looking at Taylor like, wait a minute. She's supposed to be happy in the diary room. I understand playing your part when you're out with the rest of the house, but in this case, she was in the diary room and she was still letting like fountains of tears out. And that told me that this was like something she really felt, something that really upset her. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm a cast member, I'm certainly going to buy into the fact that she does still feel alone. Now, so I'm sorry. Something funny happens, and you probably know what it is. So, because Nicole again feels so confident that she's not going anywhere, guess what she does? Drum roll, please. She reveals to the rest of the house that she is a cop. A couple things to digest here. First off, I don't believe that it was smart for her to do that, even if she was safe and she's going to stay in the house. If you're going to stay in the house, that's not something you tell people that are going to also be in the house. Now, I understand her rationale for doing so. She did that because she felt as if she was safe with this particular group of young ladies, and just not knowing or having the awareness of what's really going on in the game. That's kind of what happened with Nicole. But I'm really strongly against revealing your real career this early in the game. Now, if we're talking about its final 4, I'm all for it. But to do so this early was a bad move. The second thing I want to say is it just shows how well the leftovers played this game, or played this week, or played their hand here. And maybe even how naive Nicole was, or how over arrogant she may have been about this entire ordeal. Now, this episode also shows something that I was not expecting to see, and that is a budding romance. It's official. It is a full-blown showmance. There was a lot of talk about the live feeds about how Alyssa might have somebody at home. I think this episode solidifies that there's not much going on at home. And if there is some guy at home, he officially is upset right now, because this episode really lays into the showmance and just doesn't hold anything back. You see Kyle and Alyssa in very intimate spaces. One of them being the bathroom, where Kyle openly admits that he's sexually frustrated. And I was actually surprised to see that CBS would air this, because I was expecting them to be more, censored. But that was not the case. They showed him, talking to Alyssa about sexual frustration. They showed him taking a cold shower. These were things I was not expecting. I guess because it comes on at 9 o'clock on Thursday, they felt they might be able to get away with some of that stuff. But for me, that was a little surprising. They show Kyle and Alyssa in a room next to Daniel, who looks like he's playing Uncle Ben. He's just like got his sunglasses on. You don't know if he's alive or asleep. But the point is, you see Kyle and Alyssa having this very secret romantic moment, and they're discussing, how they feel about one another. And at this point, I start to realize, like, okay, this is really interesting. This is getting dynamic here, because that tells me that whoever's at home for Alyssa, she doesn't really care anymore. And I think they share a kiss at that point. And at that point, and there's another very interesting thing that happens. Kyle openly admits that he loves Alyssa. Now, that threw me off. I said, okay, it's showmance. All right, that's fine. You like her, that's fine as well. But to say that you love her, that was a huge step for me. And this is how it always works, right? When you talk about showmances in the BB house, they're usually rock solid. A lot of people who find love in the BB house, they're still together today. And I'm talking about from every season. They're still together to this very moment. So something happens in that house that really draws people together. And if Kyle is saying he loves her, he's walking down the exact archetype of so many BB players who have found love in the BB house. So I'm going to say it's official at this particular point. Now, at some point, the leftovers have to start discussing strategy. And one of the things that Joseph comes up with is, let's throw some votes towards Taylor's way so that our alliance stays under the radar. And what he also suggests is that we need to find people who are not in the leftovers alliance to vote or send votes at Nicole. And when I first heard the idea, I just cringed, because I'm thinking to myself, this is a terrible idea. You don't want to play around, you don't want to play games. Because what I'm also thinking is, people will tell you they'll vote for Taylor to your face, but come election or eviction night, they may not stick to the script. So I was hoping that this would not go through, or at least it would not grow legs and start running, because if so, the leftovers could have thrown maybe 2 votes towards Taylor, and then the external members who are not a part of the leftovers alliance, they could also throw votes towards Taylor, which would ultimately keep Nicole safe. So that definitely worried me a little bit. Now, I want to also say that right now, in my opinion, I have to just put this out there. I'm starting to believe that Monty may be emerging as one of the better strategic players in the house, because the way that he's keeping things under wraps, the way that he's still continuing to show his dislike for Taylor, these type of things, in my opinion, are great for his game. And I have to say that. See, was the Monty's plan to flip Nicole's intentions was genius. I'm not sure why I wrote that down, but apparently Monty did something with Nicole and tried to flip her understanding, and I wrote that down for some reason. I was still surprised by Indy. Indy in this episode was very, very, dare I say, was very resilient, because at some point they come. I think it was who comes to Indy? Someone comes to Indy and say, hey, let's try to figure this out. Let's vote out what happens? I forget. But I believe Indy is asked to between Taylor and Nicole. They want to vote out Nicole and keep Taylor, but Indy is very resilient. She's saying to herself, look, Taylor is going to win this game. That was one thing that really surprised me about Indy. Indy hasn't really shown me a game plan or a game muscle, if you will. But at that particular moment, I realized that Indy is actually playing the game. The fact that she says, no, we need to get Taylor out because she's going to win this game if we don't. And that tells me that Indy's thinking about the end game, when in fact, I thought she was just someone who would just like to tan and things of that nature. So no, Indy is actually playing a game. Yep. All right. Oh, okay. So then we fast forward to the eviction, and Nicole gives you a very rudimentary, I love people back home, thank you, I want to play this game, that kind of eviction speech. And I thought it was really good until Taylor goes up and gives her eviction speech. Now, I know if you are a big fan of BB, you have to had the same like chills I had when Taylor stood up and took that bite-sized chunk out of Nicole's everything. I mean, Taylor goes in for Nicole's jugular. She acknowledges the fact that she's been bullied. She acknowledges the fact that Nicole, or she knows that Nicole actually was her festy bestie, because she had a plan of backdooring her. And there was one thing that Taylor says that it shook me to the core. She said this was after Nicole gets evicted. She, you know how it goes. They give you like your eviction speeches from the house members. Taylor says, be careful with being the pawn because they always go home before the queen. I'm paraphrasing, but when she says that, I said that is the most impactful thing I've heard this young lady say in the house. Be careful with being a pawn because they go home before the queen. And it was so well timed. It told me that Taylor is out for blood. She is angry. She's upset. And you don't usually kick your opponent while they're down, but you have to give Taylor credit because up until that point, she had really been a very nice person. She had not been somebody who tried to, dig out people, disrespect people. Even the people that came for her and disrespected her, she never really lashed back. So this was the first time that Taylor gets some revenge and says some things that you could argue are very, very disrespectful. I mean, if the shoes were on the other role, if Taylor goes out and Nicole says that everybody's killing Nicole and saying she's mean, she's a bully, but because it's Taylor, it's okay. And I have to say, like, wait a minute, Taylor, that was kind of a low blow right there. She's out the house and you say, hey, be careful with being a pawn. The pawns go home before the queen. That's quotable. That's something that other players in the future are probably going to quote because that's so quotable. It really captured the moment that Taylor was going through. What else? Now, another thing I was very surprised about is that the entire house voted against Nicole with the exception of Daniel. Man, I really thought that Indy would have voted for Taylor. I thought that maybe Terrence would have voted for Taylor, but none of these people vote for Taylor. And what it does is it sends a really resonating memo to me, and it says, be careful who you call your friend. People will hang with you. They'll love you while you're up. But the moment you're down, they're gonna scatter away. You got to really know who's rocking with you. Like I got one person in here right now. That's got to be the person I'm rocking with because people only rock with you when you're up. But when you're down, they kind of scatter around and they get lost. But the fact of the matter is, it was really surprising two things to see that Daniel, despite being on the wrong side of the house, he owns the fact that he's on the wrong side of the house and he sticks with Nicole through it all. I love that. Just like this one person here, they're sticking with me through it all. Yeah, so shout out to you. And if you get a chance, is that Caesar? I think so. Hello. And the rest of the house absolutely abandons Nicole. And I have to say, I was very surprised by that. I was just like, wow. It shows a lot. It says a lot. And I understand why they do it, but it still tells me something about human psychology. The reason they're doing it is simple. We don't want to be seen as, we don't want to be seen on the island with Daniel because at this point they have no power. That alliance has been completely dissolved. If this was war between one side of the house and the other, I mean, the nuclear bomb has been shot towards Nicole, ameerah, Daniel, etc. At this point, Daniel was visibly upset. When you see his face on live television, you just know that he is ready to go into a storm. And at one point, when he's finally alone after the Nicole eviction, he's talking to the cameras and saying, hey, Nicole, don't leave me because I'm coming out next. So he already knows he's a dead man walking, and he certainly showed that. He didn't show any confidence at all in being able to flip the house. And this is the wrong thing to do. This is what it tells me is that Daniel put all of his eggs in one basket. That's it. He didn't spread his game out. He didn't keep it, and this was the problem from the beginning. Why everybody was so upset. They were thinking to themselves, Daniel, you can't disrespect Taylor to this bad because you never know what could happen in the game. And because he went so hard on Taylor, there's really no recourse. There's no way to come back and say, Taylor, I apologize. There's just no road, no bridge there. And it taught me another thing. Be careful how you treat people just because they're at the bottom. You just never know how things might shift. And you might just need that person who you're disrespecting. And you see that no more clear than what's going on in Daniel's situation. He's visibly upset in this episode. But it also shows me that Daniel has no clue what's going on because, again, he's pointing out a lot of different things, saying, hey, you all can't play the same game. So he doesn't even know. It's almost like Daniel has a blindfold on. And he's walking in a dark room and people are throwing rocks at him. And he's like, you all can't play the same game. But he's not naming anybody. He's not saying, hey, so Taylor, I see that you're now aligned with mine. He's not pointing out anybody. And what that tells me is it's very easy to figure this out. Daniel was clearly confused. He has no idea what's happening. He has no idea who's throwing these rocks in this game. I would have to also give Nicole a big thumbs up. I thought she kept it very, very classy. The way that she left the house was very classy. I expected Nicole to turn on like the power, the cop switch, and just like, I'm out of here. Bye, Daniel, and just walk out. That's what a lot of people do when they're blindsided. Well, actually, Nicole was very, very classy. She hugged multiple people in the house before she left. And then when she left, she talked to Julie in a very calm and subtle tone. And it told me that she was a very mature individual. Sometimes when you're in a competitive environment, it brings out the best and the worst in you. And I think a lot of people saw the worst in Nicole. And quite frankly, if we're in the house under those constraints, we might also show some things that are not necessarily positive about our characters. I mean, nobody's perfect. And I think I like the fact that Nicole kept her class. She didn't really stoop down to Taylor's level. I mean, I thought Taylor went for the low blows, and I was expecting a rebuttal by Nicole, and she just never gave one. And I really respected that, if I can be honest. We're also seeing a BB evolution. At this point, we are starting to learn that the pawns are the safer bet in evictions. And I think moving forward, this is another new era moment, another BB evolution moment. Going forward, we're going to start to realize that, or people are going to start to realize that being a pawn is just not, being the pawn is not safe, right? But did I say it wrong? The pawn is safe. Well, no, actually, let me flip that around. Being the pawn is safe, and being the person that is perceived to be safe could be tricky. You know, we don't see this many blindsides this early in the game. Usually blindsides happen towards the middle and the end of the game. But 3 times in a row, the person that's perceived to be the pawn has went home. So maybe I'm saying this wrong. Am I saying this wrong? So the pawns are not safe. I wrote it down wrong. What I meant is saying the pawns are not safe, okay? Because Pooch was a pawn, gone. Ameerah was not a pawn. Terrence was the pawn. But you get what I'm trying to go with this. I'm saying that, you know, when people tell you that you're safe and you feel like there's a bigger target on the block, don't necessarily fall for the bait, because we've seen 3 times, at least 3 times, where this is not necessarily the case. All right. So I'm just saying, there's a lot going on there. Now, I have to say this as well. We can't ignore the elephant in the room, and that is 4 people have left consecutively who all targeted Taylor, that being Paloma, Pooch, Ameerah, and Nicole. Something is off about that. How does that? I've been very flabbergasted about this since the beginning. You don't see this, okay? I want to make sure I emphasize and stamp the fact that this is not common for 4 players consecutively who's targeting one player to all go home before this one player goes home, because for all intents and purposes, it was 4 against 1, and this one person won. Can you imagine that? You know, watching a sports game where there's 1 player versus 4, and then that one player beats 4 people straight. That doesn't happen. I mean, if you're watching a boxing match, it's one female boxers versus 4 female boxers, and the one female wins, or one soccer player goes against 4. I mean, this doesn't happen. So I think you have to really take a moment and say, good job to the leftovers. Great job to Taylor. One player has effectively knocked out 4 and counting, because I believe Daniel is next. So it's crazy. What else? Taylor. Oh, yeah. So then after Nicole is evicted, Taylor is gifted with the opportunity to join one of the Besties. And I'm going to go ahead and point out that I made a critical miscalculation. I said I thought that she should have joined Daniel and Kyle. And the reason I said that is because initially I thought that Daniel was by himself. Because he was so aligned with Nicole, I just immediately thought that, you know, once Nicole went out, that was his bestie. I was like, wait a minute, I'm wrong. Daniel was actually aligned with Kyle. And that might not be the best move, because if somehow Kyle, Nicole, and Daniel go on the block and Daniel goes home, that further reveals there's something wrong. So what Taylor does is actually the better decision, and that is join up with Indy and Alyssa. And I have to say, I really, really thought, after some thinking and reflection, that was a great and smart move, because what it does is it isolates, or actually it actually destroys 2 votes. So if Taylor goes on the block again, there's 2 people who want her out that can't vote her out. Genius. Wow. I mean, it really just hit me just how smart that was. So I have to say 2 players came up in the strategy department for me, and that being Taylor and Monty. Monty, how he handled Nicole and how he handled all the chaos in the house and how he kept himself clean, and he allowed the veto winners to take over and take all the blood on their hands, I thought was ingenious. The fact that Taylor joins up with Indy and Alyssa, which cancels 2 votes against her, genius. I have to say that. But then the episode pretty much comes to an end. You see just Daniel, like I said before, having to come to Jesus moment. He's realizing that it's pretty much over for him. And I'll be honest with you, I actually felt kind of bad for him. This was the first time I felt bad for Daniel. I might be alone on that one because he's been so mean and so nasty. But I have to be honest and say I really felt bad for Daniel. I just thought that, this was, everybody gets humbled sometimes. And, I'm looking forward to see what happens next. Now, after I finish this episode, we'll talk about what happens next in my next episode. So please join me if you feel like it. And the point is, we're going to talk about the HOH competition because they don't show what happens. They just kind of cut off. And I expected that. They're trying to really get people's anticipation up. And I know that the live feeds are going to be bumping. And as you know, I will not be watching them. So I'll be a little bit late and behind the curveball on that. But it is what it is. But with all that being said, thank you for joining me on this recap and have a great night. I'll be right back in just a few moments. Peace.